Greetings, humans. You have entered the Command Zone, your destination for all aspects of Elder Dragon Highlander. Enjoy your stay.
I can see clearly now, the rain is gone.
I can see all
Obstacles in my way. Doom ba doom ba doom ba doom ba doom.
Jumping the bride, jumping.
It's gonna be a bright, sunshiny day. Cause 4 colors are here for Commander.
That's a good one.
What's up, everybody? You're listening to an episode of the Command Zone. I'm your host, Jimmy Wong.
How's it? It's Josh Lee Kwai. Boy, we're happy.
Yeah, it's the time of year where we get to talk about Commander product that is officially released by Wizards of the Coast.
Will it have been released yet?
Yes.
Sure. I think it's not. I think it comes out on the 11th.
Yes, you're right. I believe it comes out on the 11th or the 12th. So it's going to be out this weekend. All the cards have been spoiled. It's very, very exciting. And we're going to be doing this for every single deck. So this episode is all about the Atraxa deck, also the Breed Lethality deck. And we're going to go through and break down every single one of the decks. So if you guys want to see the other ones, the episodes are going to be coming out this week, next week, and I believe the week after. We're separating them all. We used to do 2 in an episode, but now we're doing 1 per. Every single one of these episodes will cover what you need to improve the deck, what we think of the deck as it stands, and also cards that we would recommend putting into it and taking out. So it's a pretty comprehensive look inside the deck. It's by no means a final comprehensive guide to upgrading it, but
right,
it's
like a quick upgrade. It's like if you take the Precon and then you just want to quickly add like 10 cards or so, just to not fully tune, but just tune it up a little bit.
Yeah.
This is a good way to go, and it's a good overview of each deck and sort of what the decks are trying to do. Because there's 4 different new legendaries, 3 partners and 1 4-color.
Yeah,
and so
there's a lot going on in all these decks.
Yeah, it's like who should I run as the lead singer, and what exactly is the deck trying to do? What's the strategy of the deck? This will be a good way to find that out.
Yep.
And a good way to purchase these decks, once you figure out which one or more than one, like if you're like us, I think you're getting all of them, right? I'm getting all of them.
Oh, yes.
Then you're going to want to pre-order them still at this point, or they might be out, and you can just straight up order them from cardkingdom.com. In fact, we had a Twitter follower tweet this at us just today. It's from Crab Goddess, which is at Kawaii Crabapple. Oh, Kawaii, local. How's it? Shaka.
I think Kauai means cute in Japanese, actually, not the island of Kauai.
Oh, really?
Sorry.
Okay, so cute crab apple. You're right, because Kauai is not even spelled right. As a Hawaiian, I should have noticed that right away. I mean, spelled right if you're Hawaiian. It's probably spelled right if you're Japanese. I'm just stepping. Okay. Crab Goddess says, that moment when the C16 pre-con you want is cheaper on Card Kingdom than anywhere else. Thanks, CommandCast, for the recommendation.
That's right. And you can actually buy the cards off of Card Kingdom by using our affiliate link by going to cardkingdom.com/commandzone. It'll let us know and let them know that we sent you there. And it's a great way to show your support for the show. So make sure you guys check it out, cardkingdom.com/commandzone for all of your Commander needs.
And you may want to pick up this deck we're about to talk about, which is called Breed Lethality. That's my favorite name of the bunch, by the way.
Really?
Yeah.
I like it too.
And it is... Well, Atraxa is on the front.
Yes. So before we get into it, let's talk about Atraxa. So this is the red list deck. It's interesting because I chose this deck to talk about, and it doesn't have my token color.
Traitor, I think we've successfully pulled you out of like fully Mr. Red. You're like Jimmy the Confused now.
I'm Jimmy the Tangerine. I'm like not all the way there. So Atraxa is green, white, blue, and black, 4 total, for a 4/4 legendary creature, Angel Horror, that has flying, vigilance, death touch, and lifelink. And the extra text at the beginning of your end step, proliferate. So you choose any number of permanents and or players with counters on them, then give each another counter of a kind already there. So this goes for +1/+1 counters. This goes for
Poison
counters, yeah, if you're playing Infect.
Charge counters.
Just
storage counters on lands or counters on, like, I don't know, Astral Cornucopia. What's that called? Like, just says put counters on there and tap for as much mana as you got counters.
Yeah, so if it says counter, you get to essentially add another one. You're proliferating.
Loyalty counters.
Yeah, Planeswalkers. So it's very interesting. This is the lead singer, as we like to say, of this deck. However, there are a lot of legendary creatures in all of the decks, including the new ones that say partner, which means you can include this with another commander that says partner on it. So we're going to go through those really fast. The first one is Rayhan, last of the Obzon, not leader. He's the last
She's
one.
like,
yeah, she's screaming.
Yeah, she is mad, I think, at Silumgar.
Yeah, so 1 black and a green for a 0/0 legendary creature human warrior. Rayhan enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Those can get proliferated. Whenever a creature you control dies or is put into the command zone, if it had 1 or more +1/+1 counters on it, you may put that many +1/+1 counters on target creature. So if Rayhan herself dies or any of the creatures on your battlefield dies while she is out, those +1/+1 counters you get to choose and move to somewhere else. They need to die. They can't be exiled. So if they enter the graveyard,
except for if Rayhan's your commander, or a creature with a +1/+1 counter is your commander, then you can choose to put it in the command zone when it gets exiled, right? And this card is interesting because it says or is put into a command zone.
Right. That's the only exception.
Yeah.
Because technically you could choose to send Rayhan to the graveyard, but because you get to choose where they go when your commander dies, it's going into the command zone. So it has to have that extra text there so that Rayhan also triggers off her own ability, which is really neat. I wish Marchesa said that.
I know, right? I don't know if Marchesa needs to be a lot more strong than she is, but I do wish that.
I'll take it. All right, another one of the partner cards is Ishai, Ojutai, Dragon Speaker. By the way, there's a ton of cards from Tarkir, the realm of the plane of Tarkir that are in these sets, which is really cool. 2, a white and a blue for a 1. Oh, I'm sorry. Rayhan also has partner on it, which says you can have 2 commanders of both have partner. All right. Ishai, Ojutai, Dragon Speaker. 2, a blue and a white for a 1/1, legendary creature bird monk, flying. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Ishai, Ojutai, Dragon Speaker.
So
with partner as well.
We talked about this last week. This is like Mana Gorger, Hydra, and a few other cards that are like this. Grows out of control really fast, has flying. If it's one of your commanders, will deal commander damage. We've been asked this question a few times on Twitter, so for clarity, when you have 2 of the partner commanders in your command zone, they actually separately keep track of their own commander attacks and their own commander damage. They don't add commander damage together, and they don't add commander attacks together. You keep track of them separately.
Yep. So Ishai is 4 mana for a 1/1, but gets out of control very quickly. However, it's just a regular flyer. It doesn't have like hexproof or something else that I'd be looking for on this commander to really sort of take it over the top.
If you want to run the partner commanders, you have to run Ishai straight out of this box because you're going to want all 4 colors. That's how the deck is built. And the other 2 are both Golgari. They're both green, black. So you'd have to choose between Rayhan and this next one.
Yeah, you want to read the last one?
Sure. It's Ikra. Oh, sure. Give me this one. Ikra Shadiki, the Usurper.
I think that's right.
It probably isn't, but whatever.
I mean, Ikra Shadiki sounds right to me. It looks right too.
Ikra Shadiki, the Usurper. It's 3, a black and a green for a 3/7 legendary Naga Wizard. Has Menace. 3/7 Menace. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you gain life equal to that creature's toughness. No wonder it's a 3/7.
Yeah. So this obviously likes big butts, and it cannot lie. If this hits someone, you gain 7 life because it's a 3/7 and it has partner. But yeah, if you want to have the access to the full 4 colors, if you're buying this precon, and you don't want to use Atraxa, you're going to have to combine Ishai with either Rayhan or Ikra Shadiki, the Usurper.
It's interesting because, like I said, you have to run Ishai, and you have to choose one of the other 2, but Ishai works really well with either of the other 2. So with Rayhan, Ishai gets +1/+1 counters, so does do the thing where the counters sort of stay when Ishai dies, you put them on another creature. And then Ikra, because Ishai is sort of evenly, right, she'll be like a 5/5, 6/6, 7/7, or whatever, you'll gain a lot of life for the toughness because the toughness grows also on Ishai. So pretty cool.
Yeah, I
don't think we're using
cards.
any of these though.
No, I mean I think
they're in the deck, right?
They're in the deck. For me, like Ishai is just way too fragile as a 1/1 that has no kind of protection around it, and Rayhan is great, but after you cast her and she gets removed, 5 mana for a 3/3 with the effect on it, then 7. It's just it doesn't work that well as opposed to just Atraxa herself that just has proliferate and she wants to beat down super hard. And I think all these cards do a really good job of being in the 99 for
True,
her.
because Ishai and Rayhan both get counters, so the proliferate will work well on them. Ikra Shadiki, not so much.
Yeah. Not to mention if you put +1/+1 counters on Atraxa, if Rayhan is out, if Atraxa dies, then you still get that ability because it's if any creature you control dies, are always put into the command zone. So Rayhan doesn't need to be your commander for that ability to affect it.
Just has to be out.
Yep. There's also a couple of other legendary cards in here that are reprints. Voral of the Hulklade. This card is one of the more, I think, powerful cards I've seen a lot of commander decks built around Voral.
Josh Kim in our playgroup has a very strong Voral deck.
Yeah.
It actually reminds me of what this deck's going to be with a lot of sort of accounting and pulling off some crazy stuff with counters. You're like, wait, what? Oh, no.
I've been calling this Math Traxa in my head, or a Trax, or a Math, I don't know. So,
Accounting Traxa.
Yeah, Counting Traxa. So Voral says 1 green and the blue for a 1/4, and you can pay green and the blue and tap him. For each counter on target artifact, creature, or land, put another one of those counters on that permanent. So no planeswalkers here, but it does essentially do proliferate at instant speed.
For one target, is that right?
No, for each counter on target artifact, creature, or land. Yeah.
I mean, it's for one thing, though.
Yeah. You can only choose one thing, so it's not as powerful as proliferate, but you get to choose one.
It's still pretty good.
Yeah, the other reprint, which is notable, I don't think this card's been reprinted since its original printing in the original Commander set. It's Gave, Guru of Spores, one of Craig Blanchette's favorite commanders. You want to read them?
Sure. Gave, Guru of Spores, 2, and what is that?
Abzan.
It's a 0/0 Fungus Shaman. Gave enters the battlefield with 5 +1/+1 counters. You can pay 1 to remove a +1/+1 counter from a creature you control and put a 1/1 green Saproling creature token onto the battlefield. Or you can pay 1, sacrifice a creature, and put a 1/1 counter on target creature. So Gave goes infinite with a lot of things where you're sort of taking off and putting on counters for, like, if you can get value out of doing stuff like that, creating guys, whatever, you can often kind of get in these loops where you're creating infinite amount of guys or making a guy infinitely large kind of thing. Gave is very, very strong. Also, Craig will sometimes use him to kill you with Infect.
Yeah, and the fact that he removes 1/1 counters from any creature you control is really powerful. This deck, if we look inside it, so what we do is we always break down what's inside all the precons and sort of give some statistics about what's in there and what you can sort of look out for when you're looking through the deck.
We need like a sort of segment separating like thing for stats, like stats.
Yeah, the word stats. Like,
Stats. That was it right there. Just replay
all right,
that.
So we're
every time,
moving on
Terry.
to our stats. I feel like the camera should be like doing like as we're on like a giant studio looking at this huge screen behind us, like on NFL Network, whatever. Yeah, stats. So in this deck, there are approximately 8 cards that ramp, which is way more than we've normally seen from the precons. One of the things we always talked about in the old precons is like they don't have very many board wipes, they don't have much ramp, and it's hard to play them out of the box because of these reasons.
Yeah, they don't have card draw. Yep. All our big categories in the old precon seem to be sort of low. This one, I'm looking at the stats, man, they did a pretty good job.
Yeah, they definitely did. So a lot of the artifacts in this deck ramp it. So we have a Soul Ring in here. We have all 3 of the signets, Golgari, Orzhov, and Simic Signet, as well as a new card like Commander Sphere, which came out last year, and also something like Darksteel Ingot. And Astral Cornucopia is a very powerful card in this deck. This is a card that enters with X charge counters, and you can choose a color, and you add 1 mana of your color of that color to your mana pool for each charge counter on Astral Cornucopia. And normally this costs XXX. So if you pay 3 mana, it's a 1 mana rock. If you pay 6 mana, it's a 2 mana rock. However, lots of ways to proliferate and make this a huge mana rock. So that's the kind of effect they're going with here for the ramp, is I think every one of these decks has all the signets. However, in the green deck, I saw 0 cards that ramp lands, which was a little worrying to me because that's a much safer way to ramp your mana, I think.
Yeah, we talked about that before. It's kind of the loophole in the format. Lands are safe generally because people don't play a lot of mass land destruction, whereas Vandalplast is just a very common card that's going to be played. So sometimes you go Signet, play something, then they Vandalblast and your ramp's gone. I mean, Signets are still great. I think Signets are actually awesome and better than most people think, but they are a little bit more vulnerable than land ramp. So if you have green, that's one of the things you can do early on is just replace some of your ramp with green ramp that puts lands into play.
Yeah, I would 100% try and maybe add a little bit of that in here. It also fixes your mana for usually a color that you know you want. These 4 color decks are going to have the issue where you're going to need to have a certain color, but you can't have access to it because your Golgari Signet doesn't make the blue you need or whatever.
Right.
But still, 8 ramp cards.
Great.
And one of the new creatures in the deck also ramps, which we'll talk a lot more about later. It's called Crystalline Crawler.
This card's sweet.
Yeah, the card is really... Actually, we'll just read it now. So it's 4 mana for a 1/1. but it has Converge, and it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each color of mana spent to cast it. So it could become a 5/5 if you use 4 different colors. You remove a +1/+1 counter from the Crystalline Crawler to add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool, and you can tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on it. So at instant speed, when this comes in, you can use it to generate 4 mana, immediately getting...
And it doesn't die.
And it doesn't die, because it's a 1/1. It's not a 0/0 like a lot of these creatures are.
So it can still sort of tap for mana after that. This card is very good, because just being able to sort of save your mana from turn 4, and now on turn 5 you have 9 mana available is so powerful, because playing a 9-drop that early can be really tough to deal with, and that's if you don't have any other ramp.
Yeah, pretty powerful. I think this may be one of the best mana rocks Wizards has printed for a format like Commander, because we love playing 5 colors, and also there's a lot of ways to abuse +1/+1 counters, as we will see. Inside this deck, ton of card draw. There are 7 different cards that do card draw, and not just like, oh, this comes into the battlefield and draws 1 card. No, we're talking cards that draw you that can draw you up to like 5 cards at once. There's a couple that, because this deck is very much about going wide with creatures, there's one that draws you cards just when a creature with a +1/+1 counter that deals combat damage, called Bred for the Hunt. There's also a card like Fathom Mage, which whenever a +1/+1 counter is put on it, you draw a card, and it has Evolve on it as well. So
I love that card.
I do too. I think the card's the perfect fit for this kind of deck. Now, normally, I think of this deck as Abzan plus blue. And blue, and Abzan's great, but there's not a lot of card advantage that you can really get out of Abzan decks usually. You usually do like a bunch of creature recursion, like we had that Corridor episode with Corbin recently. But adding the blue really, I mean, it creates your favorite color combination, which is green and blue. And the amount of ways you can draw cards to it is now like just through the roof. So it's really cool. I'm glad that they added this in here.
It's going to make the decks like play a lot better and be more consistent just with that amount of ramp and draw. So that's great.
Yeah.
It also means we don't have to waste a lot of time on the show being like, add in card draw and mana, because it's boring to say that add in Ristic Study every time, you know? Yeah.
The deck also runs cards like Tezzeret's Gambit, which is a very perfect fit. It's 3 and 1 Phyrexian blue mana to draw 2 cards and then proliferate. So there's obviously a huge +1/+1 counters matters theme in the deck, and there are 7 different card draw spells just to help that out. Here's the most important one. There's 6 board wipes or board wipe effects in this deck.
That's, again, great.
I remember the average being close to 1 or 2 in the last
in the last couple.
Cons.
Yeah, so they've really gone up. And I'll say ahead of time, just as a spoiler alert, for the deck I did, the same sort of ratios are holding true. I think they made a concentrated effort to up these categories. So I don't want to take credit for them doing that. I'm just saying I think they're moving in a really good direction as far as making these a little bit more competitive out of the box by filling the, card draw, ramp, and board wipe category and this next category.
Yeah, and I mean, the cool thing about the board wipes that they also include is they're all very thematic for this deck. Like Fester Creep is a 1 in a black 0/0 that comes into play with a +1/+1 counter on it, and then you remove a +1/+1 counter from at instant speed for 1 in the black, and all their creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn. So you can stack up the counters on this and remove a ton of counters and do a very specific targeted board wipe that is in theme with the +1/+1 counters of the deck.
Pretty cool.
Pretty cool, yeah. Next category, single target removal. This there are 3 different ways to single target remove something in this deck. As you would expect, Mortify and Putrefy are both sort of mainstays of Abzan decks. And then there's also just randomly a Disdainful Stroke, which isn't single target removal, but it's really interesting to see a random counterspell next to a Mortify or a Putrefy. So that's
that's a little low, maybe.
It's a little
like 3,
low.
Yeah,
it's definitely something I would add in for. So they didn't have Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile in this deck, and those are both, as we all know, very good cards in EDH. Yeah. Now here's the big one: cards that care about +1/+1 matters.
Wow,
27.
So that's a big sign that's blinking and saying, this is what the deck wants to do.
Yeah, because like there are 38 lands in this deck, so 27 of the remaining 62 cards, that's almost 50% of the deck is all about +1/+1 counters.
It's still blinking the sign. Still going.
But oddly enough, there are only 4 cards that say proliferate on them.
It's interesting. It does make sense a little bit, though, because your commander will say proliferate. So you always have 1. You don't need as much redundancy. I think 4 kind of feels low. But you like if you had it the other way around, where you had 27 proliferates and only 4 +1/+1 counters matters, then your deck's not going to go, because you always get a proliferate. So you might have like 7 proliferate things and nothing to proliferate.
Yeah. Very interesting, actually. So what does this tell us? This deck, I think, definitely is pretty focused. It wants to be creature-based and attack damage heavy. Almost every single card has some synergy with +1/+1 counters, or wants the card to be bigger, or wants the card to just to be a beater. And it wants to give them counters, place them on other cards, remove them, or count how many there are for additional effects. There are actually a few combat-based enchantments that are very much like, hey, if you're attacking with a creature, then good for you, because that's what this deck wants you to do. And normally those cards, I think, are just pretty bad, unless you're like a token strategy. But in this case, when every single one of your creatures is terrifying, it's a good sign.
It's a good sign.
Yeah, so otherwise it's like got a great removal package, 6
It's
to
like this
7
sign.
board wipes, yeah.
This is the neon sign.
Neon sign,
Plus one,
+1 counters.
counters.
Find them here. So let's talk about Atraxa for a second. Now, outside of being a very powerful creature for just 4 mana, it proliferates at the beginning of your end step. So I think the power level is super high, but proliferating once per turn at the end of your turn seems to kind of defeat the purpose of wanting to be a deck that beats down.
Because it happens, like,
Yeah.
it's hard to sort of get them in the way. Like, they'll see everything because you do it at your end step, then they can see it during combat. It's not like, yeah, it's interesting. I do like that it does it at your end step, though, because you get it on the first. Like, it'd be also worse to play Atraxa, not proliferate until your next turn, and Atraxa gets removed, and you never got the proliferate thing.
Yeah, so you definitely at least get to trigger it once usually before it gets removed. However, I think her ability is really good, but it makes the deck really vulnerable to board wipes, just because you play all your creatures out, you're ready, and then you drop Atraxa, you proliferate, your creatures are huge because you passed the turn.
Yeah.
You have to wait for it all the way to come back around.
True.
It also kind of removes like flash shenanigans, because you flash something in at the end of your opponent's turn right before yours, but you don't get to proliferate on it, so it's not as powerful as it could be. But regardless, Atraxa is still a nutty commander, I think, because proliferate's really fun. It's pretty powerful, and if you want to build this Voltron, she could just come in and just beat down.
I mean, Atraxa as a creature by herself, very strong.
Yeah.
She's got a ton of abilities, is a 4/4/4/4, and probably adds some other things to the board, like, puts a counter on your Astral Cornucopia and, puts another counter on, a couple of guys. So,
yeah. So in terms of ramp and card draw, I already talked about this. There's only artifact-based ramped, specifically the signets. So there's nothing spell-based in one conditional card, which is that Crystalline Crawler. This feels low. I think it's fragile. I think in general, people are keen to be removing signets and stuff if they can with something like Vandal Blast. So I would recommend in this deck, just like look at your favorite kind of like spell-based ramp, because this is green. You've got Explosive Vegetation. You're going to want to fix your mana as well. So I would just be careful, I think, moving into the meta with one of these decks, because any deck that's like prepared to get rid of artifacts might just hose you because you all of a sudden can't cast your cards anymore. All right, board wipes and single target removal. We've broken the mold. We did it. Thank you, Wizards. 6 board wipes, a lot of different ways to do it. They have Merciless Eviction, so you can exile stuff, or you can -X with cards like Bane of the Living or Languish. So they give you a lot of different options to remove stuff. Let's talk about the best cards in the deck. First up, we already mentioned it, Fathom Mage.
the card's really good in general. It's going to be great in a deck like this because it makes Atraxa say, when draw 2 cards, add the text draw 2 cards to Atraxa, right? Because Atraxa comes in, Fathom Mage evolves, you draw a card. And then on the end step, you proliferate, draw another card.
Yeah, and that's just like super powerful because you can combine this with, you know, cards like Thrumming Bird that just like hit you for 1 in the air. Someone's not going to have a 1/1, and then you get to proliferate, which is pretty darn good. You also get to combine this with cards like Master Biomancer, which each other creature you control enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters equal to Master Biomancer's power. So all of a sudden, you're just adding counters left and right.
With Gave, 2 mana, draw a card.
Yeah.
Because you remove a counter, make a creature, then take that creature and put a counter on Fathom Mage.
Yeah, Fathom Mage, I think, works just great as something that wants +1/+1 counters and gives you one of the most powerful effects in the games, which is draw a card. And that's why Gave is also one of the best cards in the deck. Like, this card does literal everything that you want it to. You get to make tokens to block with, or you can just pay 1 mana to sacrifice any of your creatures if it becomes a target removal, and you get a +1/+1 counter on someone else. So you can kind of save a creature by having it put utility somewhere else. The card's really, really good. That's why decks are entirely built around it.
Yeah.
And then there's also, as we mentioned earlier, Crystalline Crawler. And of course, Deep Glow Skate.
Oh yes, let's talk about Deep Glow Skate.
Yeah.
So this is the doubling season fish, double fish?
Yeah, people call it double fish. Someone tweeted at me bubbling season, which I thought was really cute.
Bubbling season.
Yeah.
So it's 4 and a blue for a fish, 3/3. When Deep Glow Skate enters the battlefield, double the number of each kind of counter on any number of target permanents.
Wow, so you get to choose.
And you can do all of them, and you can even do your opponents if you feel like it. This is the big card from the set that everyone's talking about. This is the deck that it's made for because there's tons of +1/+1 counters running around. There's counters on, things like your artifacts and stuff like that. And it just doubles them. It's like Proliferate gives you one more. It's incremental. This is like, nope, all of a sudden you've got twice as many.
So think about it this way. You could play Crystalline Crawler on turn, let's say 4 with 1 mana rock out. So you actually have 5 mana available to you. You can use it to take a few counters off, and then you can just play Deep Glow Skate and just bump the mana up, or just play Deep Glow Skate the next turn, and all of a sudden you have access to 8 additional mana from a Crystalline Crawler.
So good.
Yeah, it's really absurd, especially because every single card in this deck pretty much wants to have a +1/+1 counter on it. So between those 4 cards, I think those are the absolute best cards in the deck. Now, the worst cards in the deck are the ones that just kind of make you go, I'm not too scared of it. So there are cards...
Things that make you go, Things that make you go,
Kalonian Hydra, this card is unbelievable and limited. It's a 5 mana, 4/4 trample.
This is M14. I remember this card was amazing in M14 Limited.
Yeah, it enters the battlefield 4 +1/+1 counters on it, and when it attacks, you double the number of +1/+1 counters on each creature you control. This sounds really great.
It has trample too.
It has trample, right? So it's going to get in for a ton of damage. But I honestly just don't like this kind of card in the deck because it's so fragile. Again, doubling the number of +1/+1 counters sounds great, but you have to have the Kalonian Hydra attack. Someone can remove it, or if it just gets blocked and killed by a Death Toucher, you're going to feel really bad. That's why Deep Glow Skate is infinitely better because it just comes in and does it, and you get to choose where it gets doubled on. You get to do it on Planeswalkers as well. Kalonian Hydra is just kind of it's a big fatty for 5 mana, and it's scary.
It doubles all your 1/1 counters on your other guys, though.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. If you want to go 100% in the direction of just straight combat, then this is, I think, definitely not one of the worst cards. It's one of the better cards. However, I've played enough games of Commander to know that just doing straight combat isn't going to win you the game, especially if this deck has 6 board wipes and you play this in the field against everyone else, your Kalonian Hydra is going to be great for 1 turn only before it's like one of those cards that says, oh, it's time to use that board wipe I've been waiting for.
Yeah, no one's going to let you attack with it.
Not to mention if it doesn't have haste, then you have to wait for the turn cycle, so it's just kind of it's right there on the edge. But I think the more combat-based strategies are good, but it's not the way you want to win. It's just by swarming someone with a bunch of big guys, because Kalonian Hydra has trample, but your other creatures don't necessarily have it. So if you hit someone for 10, they're going to go, take 10, board wipe. And just 6 for 1 to you, or however much extra you want to add onto a card because it had +1/+1 counters on it. All right. Duelist Heritage. This card is just puke scoop. 2 and a white for an enchantment. Whenever 1 or more creatures attack, you may have target attacking creature gain double strike until end of turn. Now you may say, oh, you can do it to their creatures, so you can mess up other people's combat. But it only does 1 creature.
Yeah.
Now, if you're trying to go specifically Voltron, this could be better in the deck.
I think if you're running a Shy, this card's a lot better.
Right. The 1/1 flyer.
Yeah, because the 1/1 flyer that gets huge. Because again, you're trying to commander damage them out. But this is not going to be a deck where Atraxa is going to kill them, most likely. So it just isn't high impact enough. Yeah, it doesn't do enough. We can play cards that give all your creatures double strike.
Yeah, and but I would like to see a card like this get played and see if it affects certain matchups. Because if everyone else is playing Voltron and you choose oh, I'm going to swing at you, I'm going to give that creature double strike.
It's true. It would change a lot of things that people have to do. It'd be harder to just take damage from stuff.
Yeah.
But is that worth a card to you to have that sort of little bit of fun playtime out there? People are going to be able to deal with that, I think. Usually decks are built to deal with 1 creature coming at them. Yeah,
I would like to see someone play it and see how it turns out, because I think it's very dependent on the decks going around. But
I think in Idris it would probably be good. He's whitelist, so you can't run it, but that's a deck where you actually want your guy to have double strike.
Mm-hmm.
So
another card I don't like, Enduring Scalelord. Again, just a big fat dragon that is 4 green and a white for a 4/4. But whenever one or more +1/+1 encounters are placed on another creature you control, you can put a +1/+1 encounter on Enduring Scalelord. If you have 2 of these out, they just bounce off each other and go.
If you had clones, a bunch of clones, maybe you could try that. It just doesn't seem. I mean, I guess an infinitely large dragon is pretty good.
Yeah.
Because you could try and get the clone, get Enduring Scalelord out, wait for a rotation of the table, cast the clone, and then put a +1/+1 counter. In which case, the first Scalelord can't attack this turn. But that's just a lot to do. The deck's not doing that.
Yeah. So what happens is they see the other counter get placed on the other one, and then it places one on, and then it sees that, and so it goes back and forth, and you can make them infinitely large. But again, a lot of single target removal in the format, a lot of stuff that just says, oh, you're trying to kill me with one thing?
This deck can't have 2 of those anyway, so...
Yeah.
I mean, there's no clones, right?
Yeah, there is a card called Mirrorweave in here that each other creature becomes a copy of target non-legendary creature until end of turn, which is kind of funny. So you can make an army of Enduring Scalelords.
That's pretty good, but I don't know if it's worth it for 1 card.
Yeah, exactly. I think this deck wants to be a little... I think the way to really make this deck better is just to make it a little trickier than what it is on the surface, which is just like beating in with stuff is great, but that's not going to win you as many games as having just a little extra edge on it. Notable reprints, all the lands in this deck. Murmuring Bosk, Sungrass Prairie, Underground River, and Darkwater Catacombs are all great lands for any EDH deck.
The land bases from each of these are a big reason to buy all of them because you're just going to be able to build like a lot of multicolor decks. People ask me all the time, I wonder why, about building mana bases for 5 color, and how they do it without owning a lot of the lands. Well, this will give you a lot of the important lands that you need to do stuff like that. So, yeah, I love the lands in all these decks.
Yeah. So out of the box, I think the deck is very powerful, but it's a fairly linear deck. So it wants to put guys on the ground. It wants to give them a ton of +1/+1 counters, occasionally get some synergy by drawing off of them, and then use a card like Abzan Falconer, 2 and a white. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has flying. Or Tuskguard Captain, which says the same but for trample. And it wants to use one of those guys to be a lord for all your creatures. Send them to the air, send them all be trampled, and then you can run over someone and proliferate and do it again the next turn. But it feels particularly weak to board wipes as well as like prison effects. If someone just plays a ghostly prison out, this deck all of a sudden looks a lot worse against it. And blue does not seem to really factor into what the deck has in it, right? Like it's got all these colors, but when I look through the deck, I didn't see much blue. I saw a much higher emphasis on the Abzan side of the deck. So I think the way that I wanted to improve this deck was focus what it wants to do with the +1/+1 counters, add a few win conditions that don't rely on combat. And because it's already so creature heavy, like let's continue down that path and let's set up a board state that can guarantee you a big flashy wins with creatures, but not necessarily in combat.
So I would say, because it's interesting that you say that, and if you're going to take these, we're going to probably do this and play them right out of the box. That's an interesting thing to know what the deck wants to do and sort of how to play the deck. So there's a couple of interesting points there learned, right? One is you have to watch out to not overextend yourself into a board wipe because it's going to be hard to recover. And 2, with cards like Abzan Falconer, Tuskguard Captain, I would hold those cards. Those are your secret cards that are going to suddenly out of nowhere give you the ability to attack. And I see this from newer EDH players more, which is they sort of play their card, and you see everything coming. Whereas a more experienced player would be like, okay, I put some counters on everything, but that's all on the ground. None of it has trample, so nobody's that scared. And all of a sudden they go, Abzan Falconer, attack on the same turn. And that's how you can sort of get around some of that board wipey problems and things like that and actually KO some people. So that might be a smart way to play this deck, which is, be very aware of what you can do that's a surprise and when you need to do it.
Yeah, so a card like getting a universal haste enabler I think is pretty important for this deck. So for win conditions, I added in a card like Marionette Master, which is 4 black. It just came out in Kaladesh. It's a 1/3 with Fabricate 3. So when this creature enters the battlefield, you can put 3 +1/+1 counters on it, or you can create 3 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature tokens. Whenever an artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, target opponent loses life equal to Marionette Master's power. So if you have a sack outlet and you want it to be like, all right, I'm going to try and use Marionette Master as kind of a way to win, You get her out there, you make her into like a 20 power creature with all your proliferate, and then you just sack a few tokens or find a way to sack cards with like Gave or whatever, or you have these little servos that are lying around, or you just have a card that can get rid of sacrifice, or the best part is you could swing in with like, you can make your 1/1 servo into like a 10/10 and just start swinging at people, and if they don't block, they take 10. If they block, they get drained 40 or whatever, so
I like it.
Marionette Master I think is one of those ways to sort of get around like, hey, what are you going to do? You're not going to block me, are you? And so it puts them in a really tough position. Another card that I think would work really well in this deck is Jarad.
We should say we're on the cards you should add section.
Yes, it's not in there yet.
These cards are not in. We're now moving on to the part where we're talking about what we think you should put in. And if you look in the show notes for this show and all the shows like this, we're going to have sort of a comprehensive, these are the, 15 cards you should add, and these are the 15 cards we think you should take out as sort of a quick upgrade to the deck.
Yeah, so Jarad, Golgari Lich Lord, black, green for a 2/2. It gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard. More importantly, 1 black and a green, sacrifice another creature. Each opponent loses life equal to the sacrificed creature's power. So this to me is like, hey, you're going to board wipe. Hey, you're going to try and get rid of my big beater. Well, guess what? All of a sudden, everyone's going to lose 5, 6, 10, 11, 12. Pretty impressive. Combine this with Marionette Master, and all of a sudden you can sacrifice those little servos and drain people from Marionette Master's life total. So, her power. So I think what you want to do is find ways to get people low and then finish them off with a card like Jarad or Marionette Master.
It's another card you can play once you have enough mana and surprise people. They think they have whatever under control, and they don't see this angle of attack coming because it's not creature combat.
Yeah, and you can also sack a swamp and a forest to get Jarad from your graveyard to your hand. So, like, this card has it all for this deck. I think it has the ability to really just finish the game off. As do cards like Akroma's Memorial and Eldrazi Monument, which I've talked about in my token deck. These are cards that just shoot your guys up to the air and just give them haste, and just they wreck face.
Yeah. Akroma's Memorial, when you're in a combat deck that doesn't have red, you're going to run it so often because you need the haste, and there's not a lot of ways to give all your creatures haste outside of red.
And pro black and red, first strike vigilance. They turn them into like mini Atraxas, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's 7-mana artifact. It says creatures you control have flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection for red and black. So
pretty good. And then Eldrazi Monument makes all your creatures +1/+1 and have flying and indestructible. And interestingly, it also says at the beginning of your upkeep, sack a creature. If you don't, sack Eldrazi Monument. So if you have Marionette Master out, that's an artifact. Yeah, you can drain everyone that way by just choosing not to sack a creature or whatever.
Also, it gives everything indestructible, which I think is the huge thing, saving you from a lot of board wipes.
Yeah.
And if you have like Gave or something out, then you can just make a Saproling to sack every turn if you need to.
Yeah, so I think those are sort of the ways that you want to get on top of everyone else. And you have a Mazarek deck. Maybe Mazarek should go into this one instead.
Oh, you're setting. Yeah,
that
I
Mazarek
deck is not good.
So I was thinking, oh yeah, Josh always wants his Mazarek deck to be better.
Maybe I just turn it into a 4-color deck. That would be the most Joshling ever.
Yeah. I mean, I would honestly look towards the precons that were released last year and see what cards you can like put into your deck. Mazarek is whenever a player sacrifices another permanent, you put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. So fetch lands. If you make them do it with like Dictative Erebos and stuff, Gave, yeah. So pretty good stuff. You can make everyone very big. And this to me is much better than Kalonian Hydra. This is the card that you want to have.
Because you don't have to attack it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I said earlier, like it seemed like they didn't have much blue in the decks. A card like Momir Vig, I think would be really good in a deck like this. It gives you a tutor ability that's not broken. So you could play your demonic tutors or whatever. But I think this is a much closer to 75% kind of card where whenever you cast a green creature spell, you can search your library for a creature card and reveal it. If you do, you put it on top of your library. Whenever you cast a blue creature spell, you can reveal the top card of your library. And if it's a creature card, put that card into your hand. Mm-hmm. So, it's just kind of like got a little tutor ability onto it.
It's a little bit worse when you have 2 other colors because you're going to sometimes not cast those colors.
Yeah, the thing is, I think for the most part, you're casting green Obzon and green creatures. And Prime Speaker Zegana as well.
This card is good.
Like, this is a card that's like a mainstay in Animar decks for a good reason. 2 green, blue. It enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters where X is the greatest power among other creatures you control. And when it enters the battlefield, you draw cards equal to its power. So you could end up drawing like 15 cards with this.
Yeah, if you just had one really big dude, which you can because of Proliferate. At the very least, though, Prime Speaker Zegana will often just draw you like 5 or 6 cards, which is modest, which is awesome.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. This is sort of an innocuous card that I think would go really well in this deck. Wall of Roots. It's a great way to ramp. It's a 1 in the green, 0/5 defender, and Once a turn, you can put a -0/-1 counter on it to add green to your mana pool. So you'll be able to use this 5 times before it dies. But if you're able to put +1/+1 counters on it,
then you can do it a lot more. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
You could also choose to proliferate the -0/-1 counters.
I don't know why.
Just for the lulls.
For the lulls.
Yeah. A card like Golgari Charm as well, I think is really important in this. It's just a card that either gives all creatures -1/-1, or you can Reckon Enchantment, or you can just regenerate each creature you control. So
that's really good protection from board wipes. Again, doesn't do against the ones that say can't be regenerated or some effects, but it's still surprisingly will save you in a lot of instances.
Yeah, and if you have the budget for it, Doubling Season,
of course,
is put it in there.
No brainer.
Come on, yeah, double all your tokens as well as your planeswalkers,
as well as 1/1 counters.
A lot of people have been saying Atraxa is going to be a very good Super Friends commander. I disagree. You don't have red, so hey, how am I going to play my Decree of Annihilation?
Wait, what?
If I don't have red in my Super Friends deck?
Okay,
but you can proliferate. So I think Doubling Season, of course, is just a no-brainer. As is Parallel Lives if you're trying to go that route. Persist. This is a whole category of cards you can go nuts with. If you have the ability to add a +1/+1 counter to something, it negates the persist -1/-1 counter. So the number one card that I think is just absurdly powerful would be Glen, Elendra, Archmage.
Oh, yeah.
3 in the blue, it's a flyer that's the 2/2, and you can play a blue to sacrifice it, and then you counter target non-creature spell. And it comes back with a -1/-1 counter because it has persist. If you get rid of that -1/-1 counter, for instance, in your Rune deck, you just flicker it comes back. You can essentially have Glen, Elendra up the entire game.
In this deck, you would just add a +1/+1 counter. If you don't know, if a creature has a +1/+1 counter and a -1/-1 counter, those two counters counteract each other and they just both go away. So you can basically, if you're able to add a +1/+1 counter to Glen, Elendra, you can counter any number of target non-creature spells. I guess any number that you have that amount of blue to use for her. But basically, Glen, Elendra in those type of decks, also in the Flicker deck, can sort of shut down the table in a lot of ways because it can just turn off most of their non-creature spells.
Another way to shut down the table is Woodfall Primus, which is a 6/6 with trample that costs 8 mana. When it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-creature permanent. That's everything. That's a land. That's a planeswalker.
Just destroy what you want.
And it has persist, so it technically gets to do this twice. But no, now with the sack outlet and the way to add +1/+1 counters, you get to do this as many times as you'd like.
Another card that's super good with Kave.
Yeah, oh my gosh, absolutely. So yeah, both. I mean, I would say look into persist cards if you want to add a lot more play to the deck. A lot more you tried to board wipe me, but I had these things that happen. For instance, a Woodfall Primus survives through a board wipe, and then if you give it a +1/+1 counter, it's going to survive through another one, And every time it survives, it destroys 2 things, essentially. In terms of ramp, I really like Mirari's Wake in this deck. In fact, any deck that runs green and white, I think you should put Mirari's Wake in, especially if you're going the creature route. It buffs our creature by +1/+1, and you double all your mana, essentially.
Whenever you tap a land for mana, add 1 mana to your mana pool of any type that land produced. So you tap a not in this deck. You tap a forest, you get 2 green instead of 1.
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
It's one of those cards where if it lands and it lasts 2 rotations of the table, that person's just probably going to win. They just have so much more mana than everybody. They're just doing so much more stuff.
Yeah, and I think a big part of this deck is ramping out and getting your threats out, and also being able to draw a lot of cards and then getting them back out again. Gyre Sage is the Gaia's Cradle of this deck.
Love this card.
1 in the green with Evolve for a 1/2. Evolve, by the way, we've spoken to a lot. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield with greater power or toughness than this creature, then this creature gets a +1/+1 counter. So it starts evolving and getting bigger and following in the footsteps of the creatures in front of it. Woodfall Primus will probably trigger every evolved creature twice. So you can tap Gyre Sage to add green to your mana pool for each +1/+1 counter on it. So if this has 10 +1/+1 counters, you get 10 mana.
I have this in my Marchesa deck, which is my +1/+1 counter deck. And I've routinely had it be 7 or 8 counters on it. You're tapping the creature for 7 or 8 mana. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's pretty good. Now, tutors, I know we are kind of split on tutors. Some people don't like to run them, but I think Birthing Pod, it's a cheap card now, thanks to its banning in Modern. It's a card that every green deck that's creature-based should run. It's great for triggering your persist triggers, being a sack outlet, and just sort of finding the creatures that you need for a situation. So evolving them up, obviously, like the Gyre Sage does. And outside of that, I think the main thing is just get rid of the cards that are low win more, cards that are hey, all your creatures have vigilance when they attack. unless you're in a very specific creature meta where if you swing out, you know you're going to die in the swing back. Usually, I think what you're going to want to do with this deck is set up a lot of recursive creatures like your Woodfall Primuses and Glen Elendras, sort of lock down the board, sort of counter some big plays, and then board wipe, or do a one-sided board wipe like in Garrick's Wake, and then just swing out, kill one player, or use your Jarad Golgari Lich Lord to get rid of a single player, and sort of set up these sort of combo kills that are either based on attack or through a creature, and sort of measure out like who can stop me from attacking, who can stop me from doing this ability, and then be like, cool, I'm going to kill that person with attacking then, and this person with this ability.
Yeah, it's sort of like set up your value engine and then make sure that that carries you through, right? So make sure that it's protect its vulnerabilities, which are things like board wipes and whatnot. So play the cards that protect it, and then play the cards that allow you to suddenly burst forward with it and win, right? Things like Akroma's Memorial and stuff like that. They're like, out of nowhere, okay, I played this card, and now, you know, all the counters I put on all my stuff actually do what I want, which is get through for damage.
Yeah, so I think outside of the cards I just mentioned, you're going to want to add in your Cyclonic Rifts, cards like Triumph of the Hordes, just to get more win conditions in there. Because I've learned too many times that just trying to attack people with creatures is a novel and fun way to win, but also very high variance based on the decks you're facing.
We say it all the time. Just about every single deck you'll ever face will have a plan to deal with creatures attacking it, because it's the most likely thing to happen.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like they're like, well, I wasn't ready for that because nobody does that. Well, everybody does that, so everybody's ready for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's good to have a bunch of ideas for just ways around it. Not that attacking with creatures is bad and can never work, because it often does. It's just that it's good to have alternate avenues of attack also for when, you know, they get that wall of pillow fort stuff, or they get, you know, constant miss in their hand. How do you beat a constant miss? You got to have a plan.
Jarad.
Yep.
Marionette Master.
Yep.
So yeah, the Atraxa deck I think is pretty powerful. I'm a big fan of it so far. I'm definitely gonna. I think this is one of the first ones I'm gonna try and upgrade because I did all the work already. So no, but I like token decks. I like the ideas of adding +1/+1 counters. I think you throw in some key planeswalkers in here as well, and you are off to the races.
Little known fact, a little spoiler, is that I'm going on the Commander's Brew podcast next week. I think you're going to go on soon too.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to steal all your work. I'm doing the Atraxa deck on that podcast.
Make sure you
of course,
make sure.
they have a budget limit, so the way we work is we can say things like Akroma's Memorial, but they can't really do that. So
Sad, because I really wanted to add this guy in there. Venser the Sojourner. I'll leave it with this.
the Sojourner.
Sojourner, yeah. 3 white and blue planeswalker. You get a +2 and exile a permanent and flicker it at the next end step. So
Pretty good.
I don't know.
It also says -1 creatures are unblockable this turn.
Hey!
Pretty good when you make all your creatures like 12/12s or something.
Yeah, and then in that case, I mean, that's the cool thing too, right? You're not a token deck where you're incentivized to swing with every single creature. You can sometimes kill someone by just swinging with 3 and making them unblockable with Fencer. So
This is another card where you drop it. You don't drop it early, maybe. You hold it, drop it, make stuff unblockable. They didn't see that coming, and they don't have a way to deal with it.
and it's just a handshake GG, and it's all over.
It's all over but the crying.
Yeah, and speaking of it all being over, we're going to move on to the end step here.
Oh, wait, we got to the listeners.
Oh, yeah, to the listeners.
What card for Atraxa did we miss? Did we not talk about? What do you think is a card that's like, oh, you have to add this card?
Yeah.
And again, think about it. It's got to be sort of not with a complete overhaul of the deck. Obviously, like, you want, like, you know, awesome planeswalkers or whatever. But to make this into a Super Friends deck requires a complete overhaul. We're talking about, you know, a card you can add to the existing list and take out one card, and that card's going to be awesome.
Yep. We'd love to know. Make sure you tweet us at CommandCast or let us know in the comment section on YouTube or our new website, collected.company, where you can find all of our podcasts now. All right, we're almost done with the episode, but we have to tell you guys to remember to go to cardkingdom.com/command-zone, where you can buy all of the singles we just talked about for your Atraxa deck.
Also, you should probably order the Atraxa deck too, because if you buy the singles and then you don't have the deck, then it won't work so good.
Yeah, you'll have like the starting of a deck, and everyone's gonna be like, "What are those cards for?" You're like, "Oh, I forgot."
Dang it, I forgot like 90% of the cards.
Yep.
Yeah,
So again, cardkingdom.com/command-zone is where you can find all of that. All
Okay,
right.
now it's time for the end step where we talk about something cool outside the world of Magic. Jimmy, we went to Rocket Jump this week, and we played some board games with our good friend Matt Arnold.
Yeah, including one called Junk Art.
It's a super quick game, too. So at the end of the night, and this happens a lot on game nights, right? Which is like, you play a game, it takes a little while, and at the end, you've got a little bit of time, but you can't play another game like you just played because you don't have 2 hours. But you've got like 30 minutes, so everybody can go home, or you can game some more. Junk Art fits perfectly into that little slot. It's kind of like Jenga, But what it has is a whole bunch. It's like Jenga and Tetris, and I don't know. It has like a whole bunch of different kinds of pieces, and you get these cards, and the cards have the different pieces on them. So, and then you start to build up those pieces, and you try and keep adding them Jenga style to your little artist thing. And so as it goes, it gets harder, right? Because your first 3 pieces, you put them on, and then you get more cards, and now you've got to somehow fit those on. And some of them are like hard. There's balls,
orb,
or they're cylinders, or they're weirdly shaped, stuff. And it's supposed to be like as you go up, it's like how there's certain points where you're like, I can never add anything to this because there's no way to make these angles line up.
Yeah, and it's cool that there are different game modes. So you go to 3 different cities, and each city has a different thing. So in one, you draw 3 cards, and then you choose 2 of them to give to your neighbors that they have to use in their sculpture. So you're like looking at their sculpture, being like,
the worst one.
Ooh, this is going to really mess them up. But they also get to give you a card, and you keep building till someone falls over, they get eliminated, and the last person standing.
You were good at this game. I was not good at this game.
Yeah, I played it before, and I love Tetris and stuff. By the way, like some of the art of what things people have made, we'll show some in the video version of this podcast as well. But it's hilarious. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of like very carefully putting things down.
You're really aware of how much caffeine you've had just before that, because you're like, why am I shaking so much?
Yeah. But it's a great game. It's beautifully designed by Pretzel Games. It's all like real wooden pieces. So I 100% would suggest this. It's 2 to 6 players.
It's great. It's great for like parties, around Thanksgiving, a lot of families get together. This is a great game for stuff like that.
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Junk Art, I would definitely check it out.
Yeah.
Something else I would check out is the Masters of Modern podcast. Our sister podcast, Alex Kessler and Ben Bateman, they talk about modern format and all things competitive Magic. You can find them on Twitter at the MMCast. You can also find them on our new website, collected.company.
Our editor for the show is Terry Robertson, who does a great job, again, with the video podcast. Watch every card as we talked about them. It's going to be very important for these episodes, obviously. Because
a lot of new cards.
Brand new cards. So, yeah, check it out. YouTube.com/The Command Zone Podcast. And a big thank you to Jeffrey Palmer, as always, who creates the living card animations that help button the show and make it look so, so very cool. You can find them on Twitter at LivingCardsMTG.
Okay, remember, there will be one more episode this week. We're going to talk about the Idris deck, which is the whitelist deck. So make sure you tune in for that.
It's going to be a good one.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
I messed you up. I'm supposed to say thanks for listening.
Yeah, and we'll see you next time. It's all over.
Peace.
Erase the episode.
And you said bye. But
Erase
you put
the
up
episode.
The
it's all done. Peace.
Thank you for your attention. For further inquiries, send an email to commandcast@rocketjump.com or ask us on Twitter @JFWong and @JoshLeeQuai. See you later, alligator.
Greetings, humans.